7 years. That's how long I gave myself to this marriage, to Daniel. I poured my heart into our home, our routines, our little traditions. I knew the rhythm of his laugh, the way he liked his coffee, the sigh he made before falling asleep. But lately, he's been off, short-tempered, glued to his phone like it held the meaning of life. I told myself it was work stress, or maybe a midlife slump, but deep down, I already knew. I just didn't want to. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday, of course. I was doing laundry, nothing dramatic, just folding shirts and emptying pockets. Then I felt something stiff tucked inside his jacket. I pulled it out, a hotel receipt. My stomach sank, and then came the jewelry box. Velvet, elegant, almost mocking. Inside was a bracelet I had never seen in my life. Not on a birthday, not on our anniversary. I stood there, holding proof, and oddly, I didn't fall apart. I just went still. That night, once he'd passed out with his phone still glowing beside him, I got up. I wasn't even shaking. I just opened his messages. Deleted ones, of course, but not well hidden. And there it was. Her name, their chats, the details, the lies. It was all there, plain as day. And in that moment, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I smiled. Not because I was okay, but because, somehow, he had just handed me the gift I didn't know I needed. I sat in the dark for a while, just listening to the silence. It was strange. I expected to feel rage, betrayal, something explosive. But instead, there was a quiet calm wrapping itself around me. Like my body had been bracing for an earthquake, and now that it had finally hit, I was still standing. All those little moments I had doubted myself, thinking I was too sensitive, too paranoid, suddenly made sense. I wasn't crazy, I was right. And that truth, it gave me power. In the morning, I made him coffee, just like always. I even kissed his cheek. He didn't notice a thing. He never really did he? He sat at the table, tapping away on his phone, lying through his teeth about meetings and deadlines. And I just watched him, really looked at him. Not the man I fell in love with, but the man he'd become. Self-absorbed, distracted, lazy with his deception, and all I could think was, she can have him. But I wasn't going to play the cliché. No messy confrontations, no screaming in restaurants or throwing his clothes onto the lawn. I wanted something cleaner, sharper. I didn't just want to leave. I wanted to make a statement, one that would echo. So I started paying attention, watching how he typed her name, the flowers he once sent, the places he went when he said he was at work. I gathered the pieces like a puzzle, and piece by piece, the plan started to bloom. The more I uncovered, the less I flinched. Her name was Vanessa. I found it in his contacts, saved under something pathetic like consulting lead. She lived a few neighborhoods over, apparently liked white lilies and red wine. I even found a dinner reservation he made for their anniversary. The audacity made me laugh, a real bitter laugh that echoed off my kitchen walls. It wasn't heartbreak I felt anymore. It was liberation, laced with just enough mischief to keep me going. It's funny how invisible I must have become to him. Like I'd stopped existing the moment I stopped being convenient. But oh, I was paying attention now. To everything. To every careless text. Every whispered call in the hallway. Every fake smile after he tucked his phone away. And each little detail didn't break me. It built me. Stronger. Smarter. More focused than I'd been in years. He thought he was in control, but I was already steps ahead. So I kept my voice soft, my smile warm, my schedule predictable. All the while, I was planning something he'd never see coming. Not a scene, not revenge in the way he'd expect. No, I had something else in mind. Something poetic, precise, a goodbye wrapped in silk and thorns. And the best part? He'd never even realize it was coming until it had already arrived. I became two women at once. The wife he thought he still had, gentle, steady, smiling over coffee. And the woman who had woken up, sharpened by betrayal, quietly setting everything into motion. It was almost theatrical, the way he played his part without realizing I'd rewritten the script. Every late meeting was just more confirmation. Every fake apology a reminder that I wasn't crazy. I wasn't broken. I was done pretending not to know. The first thing I did was dig deeper. I learned her last name through an old payment he made on our joint account. Sloppy. A quick search led me to her profile. Vanessa liked sharing everything. Where she worked, where she jogged, her favorite brunch spot. She even posted the bouquet Daniel gave her last Valentine's. Red roses and white lilies. I memorized every detail, every preference. I wasn't collecting information. I was crafting something precise, something unforgettable. I never cried. Not once. Not when I saw her face. Not when I realized how long it had been going on. I just kept moving, steady, focused, almost graceful in my silence. I smiled at neighbors. I answered his texts with little hearts. I kissed him goodnight. But behind my calm, I was stitching together something beautiful. Because sometimes, the most devastating messages aren't shouted. They're delivered in silence, with flowers, a ribbon, and just the right words. I still remember the sound of the florist's voice when I called. Warm, cheerful, the kind of voice that had no idea it was about to help deliver the softest kind of justice. I asked if they had a delivery service. I gave the name, the address, the exact flower arrangement. Red roses, white lilies, nothing more, nothing less. Would you like to include a card? She asked. I paused, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I wanted every single word to land like a whisper that turns into thunder. I wrote the message slowly. I wanted it to sting, not bleed. I wanted her to read it twice, once with pride, and again with the sinking feeling that she'd just been handed the truth. Thank you for taking this weight off my shoulders. Not rage, not insults, just a nudge, like I was passing a torch she had no idea was already burning out. The florist chuckled when I signed it. That's bold, she said. That's closure, I replied. Back home, Daniel walked in later that evening like nothing had changed. He dropped his keys on the counter, kissed my cheek, asked what was for dinner, and I smiled, genuinely, easily. Because I already knew. I knew that soon, another woman would open her door and receive what she thought was love, wrapped in cellophane and tied with a bow. And I hoped, just for a second, she'd feel it. The weight of the truth I was about to send her way. I didn't rush it. Timing mattered. I waited until Friday, the day he usually claimed he was staying late. I pictured her lighting candles, maybe spritzing perfume, waiting for a man who was never fully hers to begin with. And while he was off spinning more half-truths, I confirmed the delivery. Scheduled for 3 p.m. sharp. I pictured the florist's van pulling up to her door, the box being handed over gently, like it carried something precious. It did, just not in the way she expected. That night, I was almost giddy. I made dinner. I laughed at his bad jokes. He had no clue. Not a single crack in my mask, but inside, I could feel something blooming. Not anger, not revenge. Something lighter, a sense of clarity. I wasn't sending flowers out of spite. I was sending them as a final gesture, a poetic shift in ownership. I had carried this man's weight for far too long. Now, someone else could try. When I went to bed, I didn't check his phone. I didn't need to. Whatever happened next was already in motion. And the best part? I wouldn't have to lift another finger. Because sometimes, truth doesn't scream. It arrives wrapped in elegance, delivered with a smile, and signed with the calm hand of a woman who's finally done being deceived. I imagined her face when she opened the door. Maybe she smiled at first. Who wouldn't? An elegant bouquet delivered in the middle of the day. No occasion, no warning. Red roses, bold and romantic. White lilies, graceful and pure. It probably looked like love. Maybe she thought Daniel was finally making a grand gesture. Maybe she even held them close, let herself believe she'd won something. But tucked inside that beauty was a truth she wasn't ready for. The card was handwritten. I made sure of that. A printed message would have felt cold, distant. But my words? They needed to feel personal. Thank you for taking this weight off my shoulders. Not cruel, not sarcastic, just honest. And right beneath it, the part I knew would echo in her mind long after the flowers wilted. May you enjoy every lie, every late night, and every empty promise. Clare. That was my truth, handed to her like a ribbon-tied confession. I didn't check her social media right away. I didn't need the validation. But a few hours later, it found me anyway. Screenshots being passed around in group chats, then popping up on feeds. Her post, a close-up of the bouquet, the card front and center. Comments poured in like wildfire. This is art. Queen behavior. She didn't cry. She delivered. I sat there, watching strangers cheer for a story they didn't even know belonged to me, and I felt something rare. Peace. The internet can be cruel, but that day, it felt like an unexpected wave of sisterhood. Women I didn't know, from cities I'd never visit, were clapping for me with their keyboards. They saw the strength in my silence, the message between the lines. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel invisible. I felt seen, not as the betrayed wife, not as a victim, but as someone who had taken back the narrative without screaming or begging. I was reclaiming myself, one petal at a time. Of course, Daniel had no idea yet. He was still walking through the world like a man in control of his story. But that story had just been rewritten without his permission, and I wasn't waiting for his reaction. I was done reacting. My part had been played, and now it was his turn to face the echo. I imagined her reading the card over and over, trying to understand if it was kindness or cruelty. But that was the beauty of it. It was neither. It was clarity. I didn't feel petty. I felt precise. There's something powerful about delivering the truth in a way that's undeniable. No drama, no chaos. Just a single moment that cracks the mask open. Vanessa hadn't stolen anything from me. She'd inherited a man I no longer wanted. And now she was holding the proof, not just in flowers, but in every carefully chosen word I left behind. I wasn't bitter. I was free. And I had just sent my silence wrapped in fragrance and fire. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine and watched the sun dip below the horizon like it was taking the past with it. The house was quiet, but not heavy. Just still, like it was holding its breath. I sat by the window, letting the hum of the evening settle around me, and thought about how far I'd come in just a few days. There was no plan to burn his life down, no vengeance tantrum, just small, deliberate steps toward peace. My version of closure didn't need chaos. It just needed truth. Somewhere across town, I imagined her holding that bouquet, rereading the card, maybe pacing her apartment, trying to make sense of what she'd just received. I wondered if she'd ask him about it. If he'd lie, if she'd believe him, or if the seed of doubt I planted would quietly start to bloom, like a weed in the middle of what she thought was a garden. That was the thing about deception. It never stays neat. It spreads, and eventually, it consumes. And me? I was already packing. Not just my things, but my peace, my self-respect, my future. I folded clothes with care, not grief. I placed books into boxes without hesitation. Every item I touched, I asked myself, do I want to carry this into my new life? Daniel didn't know it yet, but this wasn't just a message for her. It was the start of my exit. Quiet, graceful, permanent. The morning I left, the sky was that pale gray that makes everything feel suspended, like even the weather knew something was ending. I moved through the house like a ghost, barefoot, deliberate, almost reverent. I didn't slam doors or shatter picture frames. I didn't leave mess or noise behind, just space where my presence used to be. I had packed slowly over the past few days, little by little, until only what was mine remained. And now it was time to carry that part of me somewhere new. The bedroom looked bigger without my things. No books on the nightstand, no hairbrush by the mirror, just emptiness. And him, still asleep, blissfully unaware. I stood in the doorway and looked at him one last time. Not with sadness, not even anger. Just detachment. The kind that settles in after you've cried all your tears long before goodbye. I didn't need to wake him. I didn't owe him a monologue. He'd feel it the moment he opened his eyes and realized the silence was permanent. On the kitchen table, I left a single sheet of paper. No flourish, no apology, just my truth, the one he never cared to ask for. You never deserved me. Now you can have her, and everything else that comes with you. I didn't sign it. I didn't need to. He would know. He'd read it again and again, searching for some version of me that might still care. But that version was gone. The one who stayed, the one who begged, the one who believed, all gone. I didn't look back when I closed the door. Not once. There was no cinematic pause, no tears brimming in my eyes, just the sound of the lock clicking into place, final, quiet, satisfying. My car was already packed. Every item chosen with intention, like I was curating a new version of myself. I didn't take everything, just what mattered. Clothes I loved, books that had comforted me, photographs where I looked truly happy, not the forced smiles beside a man who barely noticed I was fading. The apartment I moved into wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. Small, sunlit, imperfect in all the right ways. The kind of place where I could start over without the weight of pretending. I opened the windows wide and let the breeze sweep through every room, like an exhale I'd been holding for years. I set a coffee mug on the counter, played music I hadn't heard in forever, and watched the dust settle in unfamiliar corners. And for the first time in so long, I felt light. Then came the brunch invites. From women I hadn't seen in months, maybe years. They'd noticed the card online. They had questions. But more than that, they had warmth. They remembered me before I disappeared into Daniel's world, before I dimmed my light to make him feel bigger. And I said yes. I said yes to every coffee date, every late breakfast, every spontaneous walk in the park. Because piece by piece, I wasn't just leaving him, I was returning to myself. I didn't check in on him, not once. I didn't ask mutual friends how he was coping. I didn't scroll through his profiles or try to gauge his reaction. That part of my life was closed. Not out of pride, but peace. And yet, I knew exactly what the silence was doing. I knew how loud it must have felt for him. No calls, no texts, no dramatic confrontation he could twist into victimhood, just absence. And the note. That one line, sitting alone on the kitchen table like a mirror he couldn't avoid. Every day in my new place brought back little pieces of joy I didn't realize I had lost. The slow mornings, the freedom to cook whatever I wanted. Reading late into the night without tiptoeing, laughing out loud at old sitcoms. It was like I had been underwater for years, and now I was breathing again. Nobody demanding, nobody dismissing, just quiet, the kind that heals instead of hurts. I wasn't rebuilding a life. I was building one that had never been fully mine to begin with, and even in the quiet, I could feel something new taking root. Not revenge, not bitterness. Something softer, something stronger. A freedom that came from letting go, of him, of the pain, of the version of me that tolerated less than I deserved. And while I didn't know exactly what would come next, I knew one thing for sure. The chapter with his name in it was over. And the next one? It was going to be mine, from the very first word. It started with one message, then another, and another. Missed calls, voicemails that stretched into desperate rambles. Claire, please call me. It's not what you think. We need to talk. I didn't even flinch. I watched the notifications pile up like unread chapters from a book I'd already finished. He was scrambling, trying to rewrite history, to soften the edges of his betrayal. But I wasn't interested in revisions. I had lived through the truth, and now I was writing something new, without him. There was a strange satisfaction in not replying, not because I wanted to punish him, but because I didn't owe him anything. I had already said what needed to be said, once, clearly, and silence was my final sentence. He had made his choices, and now he had to sit in the echo of them. I pictured him pacing, phone in hand, confused by my calm. He expected a fight, drama, maybe even a breakdown. But what he got instead was the sound of a woman who had finally moved on. One morning, while sipping coffee on my little balcony, I posted a photo. Nothing dramatic. Just me, glowing, wine glass in hand, laughing under the soft light of a vineyard afternoon. The caption was simple. Turns out letting go of garbage makes room for the good stuff. No names, no details. But everyone knew. The comments rolled in like warm hugs. Thriving. Glowing. She understood the assignment. I didn't need to explain. They felt it. And so did I. The beautiful part wasn't the vineyard or the comments or the glow in my cheeks. It was the feeling inside me, like something had finally unclenched. I wasn't performing happiness. I wasn't trying to convince anyone I was okay. I was okay. More than that, I was light. Lighter than I'd felt in years. Every moment now felt like a quiet celebration, a morning coffee without tension, a slow walk without checking the time. Even silence felt different, not empty, but full of possibility. I started saying yes more. Yes to brunch invites, yes to little weekend trips. Yes to laughing too loud and staying out a little too late. I let myself rediscover the parts of me I had tucked away to make room for him. The woman who danced while cooking, who wore bold lipstick for no reason, who took herself out to bookstores just because. I was meeting myself again, not with shame for the years I lost, but with gratitude that I finally came back. And then, just when I wasn't looking for it, something arrived. A knock at the door, a delivery man, flowers in hand. I raised an eyebrow. "For Clare," he said with a knowing smile. The arrangement was different this time. Soft peonies, eucalyptus, a splash of wildflower yellow. And the note? Simple, kind, honest. Not from Daniel, from someone new. Someone whose name I hadn't even mentioned yet, but whose presence had been gently growing in the background of my life. I held the card in my hands a moment longer than I needed to, not because I was hesitant, but because I was present. I read the words again, slowly this time. For no reason other than I thought of you, and smiled. No grand declaration, no promises, just something soft, something sincere. And in that small gesture, I felt seen in a way I hadn't in years. Not as someone's wife, not as someone's second thought, just as me, Clare. And that was enough. I placed the flowers in the center of my table, next to a new book and a half-empty mug of tea. There was no need to photograph them, no urge to post. This moment wasn't for applause. It was for me, a reminder that I hadn't just survived. I had bloomed, in quiet, unexpected ways. That even after betrayal, even after loss, life could still offer beauty. Not because someone handed it to me, but because I created space for it. I made room for better. And maybe this new someone would stay. Maybe they wouldn't. But I knew this much. I'd never again shrink to fit inside someone else's story. I had found my voice in the silence, my power in the stillness. And as I opened the window and let the warm air drift in, I knew something for certain. I wasn't waiting to be chosen anymore. I was the choice. Finally, fully, and without apology.